Safina was born under the soft glow of a crescent moon, in a village where emotions were more than mere feelings. They were sacred threads that connected every heart, every soul, and every life to the world around them. From a young age, she exhibited an unusual depth of compassion, a radiant empathy that made her stand out among her peers. When a child fell and scraped her knee, Safina would cradle her in her arms, whispering words that seemed to ease both pain and fear. When the elders wept for lost harvests or broken kinship, Safina would sit quietly by their side, offering comfort that went beyond mere gestures. It was said that her heart radiated warmth so tangible that even the animals of the village would linger near her, drawn to her gentle presence. Her kindness was not performative, it was woven into her being. She would spend entire days tending to sick animals, assisting the elderly, and sharing the little she had with children who had none. Villagers often remarked that she had a rare gift, a way of making everyone feel seen and understood. Safina's laughter carried a melody that lifted spirits, and her tears, rare though they were, reflected the depth of her soul. Even strangers visiting the village would remark on the unusual aura of light and serenity that seemed to follow her, as if the very air responded to her presence. But as often happens with light, shadows followed close behind. While many admired her, some harbored envy. A few women in the village, unable to bear the constant admiration Safina received, whispered in secret corners, their jealousy simmering beneath polite smiles. They watched with thinly veiled bitterness as Safina's compassion healed wounds that they could not touch, both physical and emotional. They murmured of unfairness, of a girl who was too gifted, too beloved, too untouchable. Their jealousy was subtle at first, hidden behind forced civility and hollow pleasantries, but it grew, quietly shaping the malice that would soon take root. Even some men, though captivated by her beauty and grace, felt a strange disquiet. They feared that her heart was too generous, too pure, too strong for their understanding. Safina never noticed these sentiments. She was too focused on seeing the best in everyone, too intent on bringing solace to suffering souls. But the threads of envy, like unseen tendrils, began to tighten around her fate. Safina herself, unaware of the gathering storm, continued to live in harmony with her values, her life a testament to empathy and understanding. She spent mornings helping the children learn songs that told the history of the village, afternoons tending to gardens with medicinal herbs, and evenings listening to the elders' stories, absorbing wisdom while offering a kind word or gentle smile. Her heart, full of hope and tender feelings, shone like a beacon in the village, drawing people near, even as unseen forces began to stir resentment and unease. The elders whispered among themselves, some with admiration, some with worry, sensing that Safina's exceptional heart, though a blessing, might also attract dark attention. The village had seen prodigious gifts before, and often, those who stood out were vulnerable to envy, malice, and curses from those who could not comprehend their light. And so, while Safina's life was bright and her days filled with warmth, a shadow lurked quietly at the edges of her world, ready to strike when her guard was lowest. The stage was set, unknowingly to her, for the tragedy that would challenge not only her heart but the very life force of the village itself. The envy that had quietly festered in the hearts of some villagers eventually coalesced into a darker force, one that had lingered unseen for generations, waiting for a pure heart to target. This antagonist, an older woman named Mariela, had once been admired for her own kindness and beauty, but time had hardened her heart, leaving only bitterness. She walked through life feeling overshadowed by those who seemed brighter, more compassionate, or more loved. When Safina's radiance began to eclipse her, Mariela's envy transformed into something far more sinister, a craving not just to diminish the girl, but to erase the very capacity for warmth and love that made her exceptional. Mariela had long studied the arcane arts whispered about in hushed tones in the village, the forbidden knowledge passed down by exiles and shadowed elders. Through these dark practices, she had learned to twist intentions and manipulate the essence of a heart, bending it to her will. For months she observed Safina, noting the girl's routines, her interactions with villagers, the gentle way she healed wounds, soothed grief, and encouraged hope. Each act of compassion, each ripple of warmth that emanated from Safina, was a dagger to Mariela's envy. She knew she could not outshine Safina through ordinary means, so she resolved to strike at the source, the heart itself. One moonless night, when the village slept under a veil of frost and shadows, Mariela approached Safina with a dark incantation, her voice low and melodic, dripping with malice. She spoke words that twisted the very essence of emotion, shaping them into a curse that would transform Safina's once tender heart into unyielding stone. As the last syllable left her lips, A subtle but immediate change rippled through Safina's being. Her chest felt heavy as though an invisible weight had pressed down upon it, constricting her breath. Where warmth had flowed freely, now there was a cold emptiness. Her heart, the core of her empathy and compassion, hardened in a slow, agonizing crystallization. The first moments were disorienting. Safina could still move, still hear the songs of the village and the rustle of the trees, but every touch, every sensation of emotional connection was muted. When a child approached her with outstretched arms, seeking comfort for a scraped knee, she tried to respond as she always had, but her hands trembled, her voice faltered, and she felt nothing. Panic surged, not from pain but from the sudden inability to love, to care, to feel the deep empathy that had defined her life. Fear gripped her, the realization dawning that her very essence had been betrayed by magic and malice. Safina's world shifted overnight. Friends approached her with concern, sensing a coldness in her gaze that had never been there before. Words that had once flowed with warmth now came clipped, hollow, and mechanical. The villagers recoiled, sensing a change they could not understand. Even the animals that had once followed her, drawn to her vitality, kept their distance, as if sensing the unnatural barrier around her heart. Isolation wrapped around her like a shroud, amplifying the cruel consequences of Mariela's curse. Emotionally, Safina grappled with disbelief and grief. She remembered the first warm touch of a friend, the gentle laughter she had shared with her peers, the tears she had shed in moments of sorrow or joy, all now memories of a life that seemed impossibly distant. The weight of the stone inside her chest pressed constantly, an unyielding reminder of the curse and the envy that had birthed it. She feared she might never love again, never feel again, and perhaps, that her entire life's purpose had been stolen in an instant. Mariela, hidden in the shadows, watched the unfolding transformation with satisfaction, convinced that she had destroyed the light that had tormented her for so long. Yet, unbeknownst to her, Safina's essence was not entirely lost. Deep beneath the stone, a tiny flicker of warmth remained, a seed of resilience that the darkness had yet to extinguish. This seed, though buried, would one day become the source of renewal, the power that could transform not only her own heart but the world around her. For now, however, Safina faced the harsh reality of a frozen heart, the immediate consequences of betrayal, and a life forever altered by a single act of envy and malevolence. The day after the curse settled into Safina's chest, the village awoke to a subtle but undeniable shift in her presence. Where she had once radiated warmth, laughter, and empathy, there was now a quiet chill, a distance that prickled like frost on skin. Those who had adored her, the children, the elders, the neighbors, approached cautiously, unsure of what had changed. Their smiles faltered when met with her cold eyes, their words seemed to vanish on the frozen air that surrounded her. Even the familiar comfort of her voice, once like a gentle river, now struck them as hollow and distant. Friends who had once sought her counsel now hesitated. They lingered at the edge of her presence, hoping for a glimpse of the warmth that had always guided them, only to retreat in confusion or discomfort. Children who had loved to run to her side when they were hurt or afraid now skirted her cautiously, sensing that the magic that had drawn them near was gone, replaced by something impassable. The bonds she had formed so naturally now felt fragile, like delicate threads stretched taut over icy waters, ready to snap under the slightest weight. Family members were equally unsettled. Her parents, though still loving, struggled to reach the daughter they had raised. Words of comfort fell flat, hugs met an unyielding resistance, and the intimate closeness that had defined their relationship seemed irreparably altered. Safina's siblings, once playful companions, now viewed her with a mixture of fear and sorrow. They whispered among themselves about the strange cold that had overtaken her, unsure whether it was illness, misfortune, or some other dark force. The village, ever attuned to omens and unseen energies, began to murmur in anxious tones, wondering if a curse or a greater danger had fallen upon their cherished child. Romantic connections, if they had existed, were strained to breaking. Lovers who had adored her gentle heart found themselves shut out, their attempts to engage met with polite deflection or a detached nod. The tender gestures that had once sparked joy now seemed irrelevant, even unwelcome, as if the stone within her chest repelled all attempts at intimacy. Their confusion quickly turned to frustration, then to fear, as they sensed that the vibrant soul they had admired had been replaced by an impenetrable barrier. Some villagers, moved by loyalty or compassion, tried to persist in reaching her. They spoke softly, left gifts, or lingered in her presence, hoping that their gestures might chip away at the stone encasing her heart. Yet the more they struggled, the more isolated she seemed, the distance widening like an invisible chasm. The tension grew palpable, a silent but heavy burden pressing down on every interaction. Safina's isolation became almost tangible, a living presence in the village. The spaces she once filled with laughter and light now seemed emptier, colder, and quieter. Her absence of warmth was not just physical, it was emotional, a void that reshaped the rhythms of the community. Those who had loved her most felt the weight of the curse even more deeply, their attempts at connection only underscoring the impossibility of bridging the growing divide. The village, once a place of shared joy and collective empathy, now held a space of anxious distance, a silent testament to the cruel power that envy had wrought. Safina woke each morning to the same unyielding weight pressing against her chest, a relentless reminder of the curse that had seized her heart. The stone within her was cold and unfeeling, a barrier that dulled every sensation of joy, sorrow, or love. She could remember warmth, she could recall laughter and tears, but these memories were like distant echoes in a canyon, vivid yet unreachable, familiar yet impossibly remote. The faces of those she had loved, the touch of hands she had comforted, the songs she had sung, all felt suspended in a space she could no longer enter. Every interaction became a struggle. She tried to respond to the villagers, to her family, to the few brave souls who lingered in her presence, but her words felt hollow. Her voice, once a conduit for her empathy, now carried only monotone responses, stripped of the emotion that had once defined it. When a child reached for her hand, she could see the expectation, the hope, and the trust reflected in their eyes, yet her stone heart could not answer. The inability to give or receive warmth tore at her spirit, leaving a hollow ache that no physical touch could heal. In solitude, Safina's mind wandered through memories of what she had been, a girl whose heart had been an open field, welcoming all life and emotion. She recalled the laughter of friends, the embrace of her parents, the gentle rhythm of nature responding to her presence. Those recollections were bittersweet. They reminded her of everything she had lost and everything she could no longer feel. The stone heart rendered her powerless to reach the people she had cherished, yet it could not erase the knowledge of the love she had once carried. This awareness, paradoxically, deepened her despair, as she realized that memory alone could not restore connection. The isolation was suffocating. Safina felt as though she were trapped behind an invisible wall, observing life without being able to participate. Every attempt at interaction was met with a subtle rejection from herself, an internal resistance that reminded her of the curse's permanence. Loneliness became her constant companion, a shadow that clung to her every movement. The contrast between the vividness of her memories and the emptiness of her present reality made the stone within her heart feel heavier with each passing day. Even the natural world, once attuned to her presence, seemed to notice the shift. Birds avoided her window, streams whispered past without pause, and the village animals no longer lingered in her company. She sensed a separation not only from people but from life itself, as if the curse had severed the bonds that tied her to the living, breathing world. Her despair was compounded by the fear that her heart might never soften, that she would remain a hollow vessel, a shadow of her former self, incapable of love, incapable of feeling, incapable of connection. Within Safina, a quiet awareness began to stir. Though she could not yet feel, she understood the magnitude of what had been taken from her. The stone was impenetrable for now, yet her soul remembered its warmth. This knowledge, fragile and tentative, became both a curse and a seed, a small, almost imperceptible ember of hope that somewhere, somehow, the stone could be broken. Until that day she remained trapped within herself, carrying the unbearable weight of memory, isolation, and the haunting realization that her feelings could no longer reach anyone. For months, Safina moved through her days like a ghost, her heart an impenetrable fortress of stone. She went about the village with mechanical precision, fulfilling her duties yet untouched by the emotions that had once guided her. The children, the elders, even her family approached cautiously, uncertain if any warmth remained, and she responded with a hollow politeness that mirrored the icy barrier within her. And yet, beneath the weight of that cold heart, a tiny ember persisted, so small that even she had almost forgotten it existed. It happened one quiet afternoon, when the village experienced a sudden tragedy. A young child had fallen into the river while attempting to fetch water, swept partially downstream by the current. Panic rippled through the gathered villagers as they scrambled to rescue him. Safina, as she had done countless times before, instinctively moved toward the edge of the riverbank. Her stone heart, which had seemed unyielding, felt a faint tug at the sight of the child's terrified eyes. Though she could not feel the panic as a parent or friend would, some part of her essence, the part unbroken by malice, responded to the sheer fragility of life. Without thinking, she reached out, her hand steady despite the cold that gripped her chest. As she lifted the child from the water, an unfamiliar warmth prickled her skin. Her fingers tingled as if the contact had awakened something dormant, something the curse had sought to suppress. The villagers gasped, not because of the rescue itself, but because the smallest drop of liquid appeared to shimmer at the corner of her eye. Safina blinked and felt it fall, a single tear. It was the first since the heart had turned to stone, a crystal-clear droplet that glimmered faintly in the sunlight. The tear itself was no ordinary water. As it touched the ground near the river's edge, it seeped into the soil and the grass, dulled by the morning frost, turned green once more. Tiny flowers bloomed along the bank, reaching toward the shimmer of the sunlight reflected in that single tear. Birds perched nearby and began to chirp, and even the water seemed to ripple with a gentler current. The villagers watched in awe, whispering to one another that something extraordinary had happened. They had never seen such a thing, not even in their most sacred tales. Safina herself did not fully understand the significance of what had occurred. Her stone heart had cracked, if only slightly, allowing a fragment of her old compassion to surface. That single tear was proof that even the heaviest curse could not extinguish the innate power within her. Beneath the cold exterior, her soul still possessed the capacity to affect life, to heal and to nurture. Though the curse remained, the latent magic within her, connected to her emotions, her empathy and her essence, had found a way to manifest. For the first time in what felt like an eternity, Safina recognized the possibility of renewal. She realized that the stone encasing her heart was not absolute. One tear, a simple act of compassion, had sparked life into the land around her and hinted at the profound potential that still lay dormant. The path ahead would be long and the curse formidable, but the first crack had appeared. And within it, hope glimmered. As days passed after that first tear, Safina began to notice subtle changes in the world around her, though she could hardly grasp their significance. The villagers, who had long observed her with cautious distance, whispered nervously as streams that had run thin and sluggish began to swell with crystal-clear water. What once had been murky puddles and stagnant brooks now gurgled with life, their gentle currents carrying the reflections of sunlight that sparkled like scattered jewels across the landscape. The transformation was slow at first, almost imperceptible but undeniable to those who watched. The effect seemed to follow the rhythm of Safina's emotions. When she felt the faintest twinge of empathy or sorrow, the streams rippled more strongly, responding to her subtle awareness of the suffering around her. Leaves on the trees quivered as if greeting a gentle wind, and buds that had been dormant through harsh seasons began to swell and unfurl into delicate blossoms. The once dry riverbanks, hardened by neglect and drought, softened under the influence of her presence, the soil turning rich and dark, welcoming seeds that had long lain dormant. Even flowers thought lost to frost or drought pushed through the earth to lift their fragile heads toward the sky. Animals, too, began to respond to the subtle energy radiating from her slowly thawing heart. Birds, once hesitant, returned to her vicinity, landing on fences, tree branches, and even the ground at her feet. They chirped and sang in tones more vibrant than she had ever remembered, as if attuned to the rhythm of her emotions. Small mammals, from squirrels to foxes, emerged from hiding, observing her with quiet curiosity, sensing a protective force emanating from her presence. Even the wind seemed to follow her steps, carrying a gentle warmth that hinted at a life force awakening in the world around her. Safina, though still encased in the stone remnants of her heart, began to feel a faint resonance with the land. She realized that the tears she shed, though small and rare, were more than expressions of fleeting emotion. They carried life, restoration, and connection. Each tear that touched the earth seemed to repair the imbalance caused not only by the curse but also by neglect and sorrow that had accumulated over years. The river that began to swell near her home symbolized not just her first act of compassion, but a slowly growing thread linking her spirit to the vitality of the natural world. Though she could not yet fully experience love or warmth, Safina observed the results of her tears with a mix of awe and cautious hope. The connection between her emotions and the life around her hinted at something profound, that even in the deepest despair, even within a heart hardened by malevolence, there existed the potential for renewal. Every subtle shift in the breeze, every awakening bloom, every ripple across the water carried a message. The world itself responded to her, reflecting the spark of her latent power. For the villagers, this slowly manifesting phenomenon was both terrifying and miraculous. Some whispered of divine favor, others murmured about dark magic, but all could see that Safina was no longer merely a human among them. Her presence now wielded a subtle yet undeniable influence over the land, a reminder that life, love and compassion could endure even under the heaviest curse. And while the stone heart still confined the deepest reaches of her soul, the river of life flowing around her marked the beginning of something extraordinary, a bond between her awakening heart and the vitality of the world itself, a promise that even sorrow and despair could be transformed into creation and renewal. Even as the river swelled and the land began to respond to her presence, Safina found herself drawn inward, to the quiet spaces of memory where the warmth of her former life lingered. In the stillness of early mornings, when the mist hovered over the streams and the world seemed suspended in a fragile hush, visions of her past visited her like ghosts. She remembered the days when laughter had flowed as freely as sunlight through the trees, when every interaction carried the comfort of genuine connection, and when her heart had pulsed with the vibrant energy of love, joy, and sorrow. She recalled the gentle embrace of her mother, who had always known how to soothe her fears with a touch or a whisper. She remembered playing among the fields with friends, their laughter mingling with the songs of birds, creating a symphony of innocence and camaraderie. Even the simplest moments, sharing bread with neighbors, helping an elderly villager carry water, or whispering encouragement to a child learning to walk, were etched into her consciousness, vivid and unyielding. These recollections, though beautiful, were bittersweet. Each memory reminded her of the stark contrast between what had been and what now was, a chasm widened by the curse that had turned her heart to stone. As the memories washed over her, Safina felt a strange ache, not one of immediate warmth or love, but a longing so deep it resonated within the cold walls of her heart. She recognized the depth of what she had lost, and the isolation imposed by the curse became almost tangible. Every attempt to reach out to others, every moment when her actions were met with polite distance or fear, reminded her of the barrier that still encased her. Yet, these recollections were not purely a source of sorrow. They stirred something else, a faint, stubborn ember of determination. The images of her past life ignited a resolve within her that she could not ignore. She realized that the stone encasing her heart, though formidable, was not the final arbiter of her fate. Somewhere beneath the frost and weight, the essence of Safina, the part that had loved, laughed, and grieved, still existed. If she could tap into that essence, if she could reach through the layers of cold imposed by Mariela's curse, perhaps she could reclaim not only her emotions but the power they held. Safina's longing for connection deepened with each memory. The warmth she had felt, the bonds she had nurtured, and the vitality she had brought to the world were not irretrievably lost. They were suspended, waiting for the right spark to awaken them. These whispers of the past became a guiding force, a reminder that her heart, though stone for now, could still be softened. And with that realization came a quiet determination. She would not remain an isolated figure, frozen in despair. She would reclaim the fullness of her heart, restore the connections she cherished, and awaken the latent power that still coursed invisibly through her being. Though the river of life around her flowed with renewed energy, Safina soon discovered that her journey to reclaim her heart would not be simple. The forces behind the curse, ancient, lingering shadows tied to Mariela's malice, did not intend to allow her to awaken fully without resistance. Subtle temptations arose, whispering that the coldness of her heart was safer, that detachment would spare her from pain and disappointment. In quiet moments, when the world seemed still, these voices crept into her mind, suggesting that the stone was her shield, her protection from a world that might betray her again. Safina's first test came in the form of the villagers themselves. While some approached with cautious hope, others acted out of fear, misunderstanding, or judgment. Their distrust and suspicion seemed designed to reinforce her isolation, to tempt her into retreating further into her frozen shell. The whispers in her mind urged her to ignore their attempts at reconciliation, to maintain the safety of numbness. Yet something stirred within her, a faint, stubborn urge to reach beyond her fear and respond, however tentatively, to those who still believed in her. The forces behind the curse were subtle but relentless. Emotional traps appeared as memories twisted with doubt, recalling betrayals and missteps that had left scars even before her heart had turned to stone. They tried to convince her that connection was dangerous, that every bond she sought would inevitably crumble. In moments of weakness, she felt the familiar weight of despair pressing against her chest, urging her to abandon hope. But in the midst of these trials, she glimpsed the impact of her tears on the land, the river that swelled with life, the plants that revived, the wildlife that returned. These signs reminded her that emotion, even in its smallest expressions, had power. Safina learned to navigate these trials carefully. Each interaction became a conscious effort, each flicker of feeling a small act of courage. When a villager brought news of hardship, she felt the tug of empathy, tested it against the temptation of cold detachment and chose, again and again, to respond. She allowed herself to shed tears of grief for loss, small drops that flowed from her chest despite the stone within. Each tear was both a rebellion against the curse and a reinforcement of her connection to life. Over time she began to recognize the patterns of the emotional traps. Distractions no longer caught her off guard. Temptations to retreat into numbness became challenges she could meet with awareness. Safina's resilience grew, a quiet strength formed in the tension between fear and hope. She realized that opening herself cautiously, allowing small moments of feeling without surrendering entirely to the risk of pain, was the key to reclaiming her heart. Each step forward, each act of cautious compassion, became a victory against the shadows that had sought to keep her isolated. Though her stone heart remained partially intact, Safina discovered that true courage was not the absence of fear, but the willingness to feel despite it. The trials she faced tested not only her emotions but her inner strength, teaching her that the path to reclamation required patience, wisdom, and the courage to trust in her own resilience. The first cracks in her stone heart deepened, and with every choice to open herself however slightly, she moved closer to the full restoration of the life, love, and power that were always meant to flow through her. As Safina continued to navigate the trials set before her, she began to notice a transformation that exceeded anything she had imagined. The single tear that had first broken through the stone of her heart had started a ripple, but now the ripples were converging into a stream. Small rivulets, once isolated across the forest floor, trickled toward one another, fed by her subtle emotional shifts and the quiet outpourings of grief, empathy, and longing. Where once the woods had been patchy, dry, and desolate, now water gleamed in winding paths, reflecting sunlight and awakening life in its path. At first, Safina did not understand the magnitude of what was happening. One morning, she wandered deeper into the forest, drawn by a faint glimmer of water she had not seen before. As she followed it, she realized that each small tributary she encountered was connected to another, forming a network of streams that threaded through the land like veins carrying vitality. Birds swooped along the water, dipping beaks to drink and singing in joyous chorus. Deer cautiously approached to quench their thirst, and the forest underbrush began to sprout vibrant green shoots, reaching skyward as if awakened by her presence. With each step, Safina felt the pulse of life responding to her emotions. When sorrow touched her chest, the streams swelled gently. When a flicker of hope stirred, the currents sparkled with renewed energy. Her heart, though still partially stone, seemed to extend its influence outward, connecting not only with the immediate flora and fauna but also with the very earth beneath her feet. The realization struck her with both wonder and awe. Her emotions were not limited to her own body, they could flow outward, restoring vitality across the forest and even reaching the edges of the village. This discovery filled her with a sense of purpose. The cursed heart that had once isolated her was now a source of renewal. She could see that areas of the forest previously withered or barren were flourishing once more as the streams converged, carrying life to every corner. Her influence was subtle yet undeniable. Even the air seemed clearer, carrying scents of blossoming flowers and damp earth. The village too began to notice these changes. Crops at the outskirts flourished, animals returned to abandoned paths, and the villagers marveled at the invisible hand that seemed to guide the rebirth of the land. Safina realized that her tears were more than an emotional release. They were a bridge, a conduit connecting her innermost feelings to the world around her. Her grief, compassion, and emerging hope could heal not just herself but the land itself. The river she had unwittingly created was no longer merely a physical stream. It was a symbol of the awakening within her heart. With each step she took along its banks, Safina understood that the curse, while cruel, had also revealed a profound truth. Even the smallest expression of genuine emotion held the power to restore, renew, and connect life in ways she had never imagined. The air hung heavy with tension as Safina approached the heart of the forest where the curse had first taken form. The trees leaned inward, their branches twisting as though observing her every step, while the stream she had nurtured glimmered with anticipation, reflecting the pale sunlight in ripples of life. She knew that the envious force, the shadow of Mariela, the one who had condemned her heart to stone, still lingered in this place. Its presence was palpable, a cold wind that carried whispers of doubt, fleeting shadows that mirrored her deepest insecurities, and a faint murmur of cruelty that sought to unnerve her. Yet, for the first time since the curse had been cast, Safina felt prepared to face it, not as a helpless victim, but as a being who had begun to reclaim her power. The shadow emerged slowly from the undergrowth, its form ever shifting, neither fully human nor completely formless. Its voice slithered through the trees, venomous and taunting. "Do you truly believe your fragile heart can overcome me?" it hissed. "You are nothing but stone and tears. You are powerless, and your compassion is meaningless against the darkness I wield." Safina paused, letting the river at her feet mirror her steadying breaths. She thought of the forest, of the flowers and animals she had restored, of the village that had begun to flourish once more. Every tear she had shed had carried not only sorrow but life, and each act of empathy had strengthened her connection to the world around her. "You are wrong," she said softly, her voice echoing like rippling water through the trees. Though the stone still clung to her heart, it was fractured, and through the cracks her words held warmth, conviction, and defiance. "I am not powerless. Every tear, every act of love, every choice to care, these are my strength. You may have tried to harden me, to isolate me, but I have learned that compassion is more powerful than your hatred." The shadow recoiled, flaring with dark energy that twisted the branches and churned the soil into frosted patterns. It attacked with illusions designed to tempt her back into numbness. Visions of betrayal, mockeries of her failures, and the familiar whisper that love and empathy only lead to suffering. But Safina did not falter. She focused on the stream, the life that had flourished under her guidance. She remembered the first tear, fragile and shining, that had begun to awaken her powers. She drew strength from the natural world, from the birds and animals, from the greenery that had returned to the land. With each steady breath, the whispers of fear faded, replaced by a resonance she had never felt before, a harmony between heart, mind, and nature itself. She stepped forward, extending her hands to the shadow. "I forgive you," she said. "Not because you deserve it, but because I refuse to let your malice bind me. Your darkness has shaped me, yes, but it cannot dictate the truth of who I am." Her words radiated through the clearing, touching every leaf, stream, and creature that had been nourished by her tears. The shadow shrieked, lashing outward with bursts of fear and fury, but with each wave Safina's courage only grew. Her emotions, once suppressed, now fueled her power, and the river that had formed around her surged in a brilliant arc, cascading with renewed vitality. The confrontation reached its zenith as the shadow attempted one final assault, a maelstrom of despair, a concentrated effort to crush her spirit. Safina stood firm, letting the full weight of her growth and self-realization flow through her. She summoned the essence of her empathy, her tears, and the life she had nurtured into a radiant force. The river surged, winding around her and sweeping toward the shadow, reflecting the power of her reclaimed heart. The shadow shrieked again, this time with a mixture of rage and disbelief, before dissolving into nothingness, its hold over her finally broken. In the silence that followed, Safina felt the final remnants of stone within her heart shatter, replaced with warmth, clarity, and an overwhelming sense of connection. She was no longer merely human nor merely cursed. She was a bridge between the world of emotion and the natural world, a force of renewal and life. The forest itself seemed to exhale, the streams sparkling with gratitude, the trees swaying gently, and the animals observing with calm reverence. Safina had faced the darkness not with anger, not with vengeance, but with courage, empathy, and love. She had proven that even the coldest curse could not withstand the strength of a heart willing to feel, to heal, and to give. In that moment, she understood fully that the magic within her was inseparable from her humanity. Her emotions were her power, and her tears were the conduit through which life, hope, and renewal flowed. The forest glistened under the gentle caress of dawn as Safina stood at the river's edge, her reflection shimmering across the water she had unwittingly created. The final confrontation with the shadow that had cursed her had left a resonance in the air, a quiet hum that seemed to echo the rhythm of life itself. For the first time since that cruel day when her heart had been turned to stone, she felt the warmth of her own pulse, the subtle rise and fall of her chest carrying not just breath but a flood of emotions long suppressed. It began as a faint, almost hesitant warmth, spreading slowly through the cold fractures within her chest. As the days passed, Safina realized that the river she had nurtured was more than a physical manifestation of her tears, it was a mirror of her own heart. Every bend and curve reflected the flow of her feelings. Joy, sorrow, hope, grief, love, and compassion intertwining in a dance of life. With each heartbeat, she felt the stone that had once imprisoned her dissolve completely, melting into nothingness as though it had never existed. She could feel anger without bitterness, sadness without despair, and love without fear. Each emotion surged through her freely, filling her with a vibrancy she had thought lost forever. The transformation was not only internal. Where the river touched the land, flowers bloomed with radiant colors, forests regained their dense green canopy, and wildlife returned to territories long abandoned. Birds sang in clear, melodious voices, their songs weaving through the trees in harmonies that mirrored the new rhythms within Safina's heart. Even the villagers who had once kept their distance felt drawn to the miracle that had unfolded before their eyes. They came cautiously, observing the river and the young woman who stood at its center, radiating warmth, strength, and undeniable presence. At first they approached with fear and uncertainty. Whispers ran through the crowd, some spoke of witchcraft, others of divine favor. Yet, as Safina reached out to touch the hands of those who approached, a spark of recognition passed between them. They saw not only the magic of the river but the profound humanity restored within her. The compassion she exuded was tangible, like a gentle current flowing from her very being into the hearts of those around her. Parents held their children close, friends offered tentative smiles, and even those who had doubted her began to acknowledge her resilience. The river itself became a symbol of her journey. Its waters, flowing freely and unimpeded, reflected the freedom that now coursed through her veins. Villagers began to rely on its abundance. Irrigation for crops, drinking water for animals, and a gathering place where celebrations could be held. They named it the River of Tears and Triumph, honoring the young woman whose sorrow had become life-giving. Each time Safina gazed upon its sparkling currents, she remembered the struggles she had faced, the curse, the isolation, the trials of emotion, and understood that her endurance had not only restored herself but had also given new life to the world around her. Safina's emotional awakening did not come without learning. She understood that freedom of heart was not the absence of struggle but the ability to feel fully, to face pain and joy with equal courage. She embraced her newfound capacity for empathy, allowing it to guide her interactions with the villagers, the land, and all living creatures. Her love was no longer naive or fragile. It was tempered by hardship, strengthened by resilience, and enriched by the depth of experience that only suffering could bring. As the village adapted to the presence of the River of Tears and Triumph, Safina became a living testament to the power of endurance, compassion, and emotional courage. She led not as a ruler or a figure of fear but as a guide, a teacher, and a symbol of hope. Children learned from her, understanding that even the gravest misfortune could yield growth, and the villagers collectively recognized that the miracle they had witnessed was not simply magic. It was the transformative force of a heart restored. In the final quiet moments of each day, Safina would sit by the river's edge, feeling the flow of water echo the flow of life within her. The stone that had once threatened to imprison her was gone, leaving behind a heart capable of infinite love and resilience. Her tears, which had once been a mark of sorrow and curse, were now celebrated as a source of vitality, teaching all who witnessed them that even in the depths of pain, renewal is possible. The village and the forest thrived together, bound by the river and the young woman whose journey from stone to life had reshaped their world forever.